A lonely veteran took the back road through the Montana snow, hoping to avoid every voice that still remembered him. Then a wounded German shepherd stepped out of the pines and stopped in front of his truck. One old command changed everything. The dog was Bastian, the partner he believed he had lost 5 years ago. But Bastian had not crossed the mountain just to come home. He was carrying a message from a veteran's house cut off by winter, where people were still waiting in the cold. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, healing. Copperglass woke beneath a pale blue February sky, the kind of sky that looked too clean to belong to the world below it. Snow had fallen during the night, not heavily, but enough to smooth the rough edges of the town. Fence rails became white lines, roofs softened. The dark pines on the hillsides carried silver along every branch, and the long shoulder of the Bitterroot Mountains stood beyond the valley like something old and patient. Rhett Lawson Kendry left his cabin before most of Copperglass had turned on its kitchen lights. He did not do it because he liked the early hour. He did it because the early hour asked nothing of him. No one waved from the hardware store. No one stepped out of the diner with coffee and a question. No one called across the street asking how his knee was holding up or whether he would come by the veterans' breakfast this month. At 6 in the morning, the town still belonged to the plows, the ravens, and men who preferred the sound of an engine to the sound of sympathy. Rhett's old pickup idled outside the cabin, its hood trembling softly in the cold. The truck was the color of faded slate, with rust showing along the wheel wells and a dent across the rear bumper that he had never bothered to fix. In the bed were 2 fuel cans, a toolbox, a coil of insulated cable, and a rebuilt voltage regulator wrapped in canvas. The county repeater station on High Ledge had lost its backup generator again. That was the official reason he was driving up the mountain. The unofficial reason was simpler. The road to High Ledge could be reached 2 ways. The main route passed through the center of Copperglass, past the diner, the sheriff's office, and the small post office where people stood too close and remembered too much. The back route cut north through timber, climbed along Coldwater Pass, and offered 15 miles of silence. Rhett chose the silence. He stepped off the porch with a slow, careful weight on his left leg. He was tall, a little over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders in a way that age had not erased. His body still carried the old discipline of movement, but not the ease. Every winter morning made his knee announce itself before the rest of him had fully arrived. He wore his usual field layer, an olive-drab Navy SEAL-style combat shirt, close-fitted through the torso, with woodland camouflage sleeves and dark horizontal bands around the upper arms. Over it he had pulled a stone-gray work vest with too many pockets and a small tear near the collar. Charcoal cargo pants, weatherproof boots, black gloves, and a battered watch completed the uniform of a man who no longer wore one. At his belt hung an old brass compass in a scratched case. He had not opened it in years. Still, he never left without it. Inside the truck, the heater pushed out air that smelled faintly of dust and oil. Rhett placed a metal travel mug in the cup holder, checked the road report on the radio, then switched the volume down before the announcer's voice could become company. The tires rolled over packed snow, crunching softly as he left the cabin behind. Copperglass thinned quickly at the edges. A few houses gave way to open pasture. The pasture gave way to timber. Soon there was nothing but the road, the pines, and the white light of morning gathering over the slopes. Rhett preferred roads like this because they did not ask him to be polite. They did not mistake quiet for strength. They did not tell him he was doing better every time he managed to stand still in public without walking away. He had become good at useful things, repairing generators, welding cracked brackets, replacing tracks on snow machines, hauling fuel, troubleshooting systems that either worked or did not. Machines were merciful that way. People kept asking what something meant. The truck climbed toward Coldwater Pass. Frost feathered the lower corners of the windshield. Rhett glanced once at the fuel gauge, once at the sky. once at the narrow wall of pines leaning close to the road. The sun had begun to touch the high branches, turning the snow to a kind of blue-white fire. He was thinking about the generator at High Ledge when the shape moved. At first it was only a break in the rhythm of the trees, a dark mark against the white shoulder. Rhett eased his foot off the gas. The shape staggered out from between two pines, stopped, and swayed as if the road itself were moving beneath it. For one suspended second, his mind tried to name it wrong: a young elk, a coyote, a torn tarp blown from a passing truck. Then the head lifted, a dog. Rhett braked gently. The pickup slid half a foot before the tires found grip. He stopped several yards away and kept both hands on the wheel. The German Shepherd stood in the middle of the road. Not stood, exactly. Endured. Snow clung to the animal's shoulders and back. The coat beneath was yellow-brown and black, thick but roughened by cold and travel. One rear leg barely touched the ground. The dog's sides moved with shallow effort, and the muzzle, dark and graying, pointed straight toward the truck. Most injured animals looked away first. This one did not. Rhett sat without moving. Something small and old tightened beneath his ribs. "Easy," he murmured, though the cab was closed and the dog could not hear him. He turned on the hazard lights. No traffic was coming, but habit still mattered. Then he opened the door and stepped down into the snow. The cold struck the exposed parts of his face. It smelled of pine resin, ice, and the faint metallic breath of the mountains. Rhett kept his shoulders low and his hands visible as he moved around the front of the truck. The dog watched him. No growl, no retreat, no pleading either, just watchfulness. Rhett stopped several paces away and crouched with care, his bad knee resisting the bend. He pulled off one tin glove and held his bare hand low, palm down. The cold bit instantly into his fingers. "Hey, big man," he said quietly, "not here to crowd you." The shepherd took one uneven step, then another. Its right ear stood almost straight, but the left, or no, the right from Rhett's angle, tilted slightly outward, not floppy, not broken, just set wrong in a way that tugged at some place in his memory. Rhett's breath slowed. He looked closer. The dog's saddle was black and broad, but it dipped lower on the left side, a sloping shadow across the ribs. There was a small pale scar near the left shoulder, half hidden beneath dirty winter fur. No, the thought came so sharply that Rhett almost stood. No, that was not possible. 5 years changed a dog. Cold changed a dog. Hunger, distance, hard ground, bad luck. All of it could carve a noble animal into something thinner and rougher. Memory could also lie. Rhett knew that better than most men. The shepherd came close enough for Rhett to see the eyes. Amber, not bright now, not young, but deep, steady, and unbearably familiar. Rhett felt the world narrow until there was no road, no truck, no mountain, only the space between his hand and the dog's lowered head. He swallowed. There was one command he had not spoken aloud in years, a useless thing now, a relic, a sound from a life that had ended in paperwork, hospital walls, and months he could not fully account for. His voice came out rough. "Anchor." The dog froze. For the first time, the animal's guarded stillness broke. The ears lifted. The head came up. Something moved through the old shepherd's face. Not excitement, not confusion, but recognition so plain it felt almost human. Rhett's hand began to tremble. "Bastion," he whispered. The dog tried to step forward and nearly folded. Rhett reached him before he fell, one arm sliding beneath the chest, the other steadying the ribs. The shepherd pressed his forehead against Rhett's sternum and held it there. No sound came from Rhett. He could not have made one if he tried. The snow kept drifting out of the trees. The hazard lights clicked behind him. Somewhere far down the pass, a raven called once and fell silent. Rhett lowered himself into the snow beside the dog and held him carefully, as though touch alone might prove what his mind still refused to accept. Bastion. The name did not belong to the road. It belonged to sun-baked training yards, aircraft noise, long nights waiting beside field stretchers, and a younger version of Rhett who still believed that promises were things a man could carry without dropping. Bastion had been more than a working dog. He had been the one creature who stayed close when Rhett's voice was too hard, when his hands shook after long hours, when the world tilted and no one else could see it. Bastian had slept outside his temporary quarters. Bastian had learned his breathing patterns. Bastian had known when to lean in and when to stay 3 feet away. Then came the injury, then the discharge, then the long blank season after. And somewhere inside that season, Bastian had been taken out of Rhett's life, or so Rhett had told himself. He forced his focus back to the present. Sentiment could come later. The dog was cold, hurt, tired beyond ordinary exhaustion. Rhett examined him quickly without turning the moment into something worse than it was. No obvious break. Paw pads scraped raw from distance and frozen ground. Rear leg swollen at the joint. Dehydration, exhaustion, exposure. The kind of condition that came from walking too long because stopping was not an option. Only then did he notice the collar. It was not military issue, not the old working collar, Rhett remembered. This one was dark brown leather, worn soft, with ice gathered around the buckle. A scratched metal tag hung from one ring. Rhett brushed snow from it. North Star Ridge House, Copperglass County Veteran Recovery Residence. Below that was a phone number. Attached beside the tag was a small emergency beacon, its indicator light blinking weakly red under a crust of frost. Tied near the clasp was a strip of reflective fabric, torn from a jacket or safety vest. Rhett stared at it. The cold in his fingers deepened, but he barely felt it. North Star Ridge House. He knew the name. Everyone around Copperglass knew the name. A place up beyond the timber roads where former service members went when town life was too loud, families were too complicated, or the ordinary world had become a room with no door. He had never gone there. He had driven past the turnoff twice and kept going both times. Bastian shifted against him, a faint tremor passing through the dog's body. "All right," Rhett said, voice low. "All right, I've got you." The words nearly undid him, because once, years ago, he had said the same thing and failed to make it true. Getting Bastian into the truck took time. Rhett moved slowly, using an old wool blanket from behind the seat and the strength in his arms rather than asking the dog to stand. Bastian made no attempt to resist. That was almost worse. A dog like him did not surrender easily unless he had spent everything else. Rhett laid him across the rear bench and covered him loosely. The shepherd's eyes followed him as he shut the door, walked around the truck, and climbed back in. The generator at High Ledge could wait. Rhett turned the truck around. The drive down from Coldwater Pass felt longer than the climb. The road curved through bands of shadow and sudden sunlight, each bend revealing more white trees, more quiet, more empty mountain. Rhett kept glancing into the rearview mirror. Bastian lay still, but his eyes remained open. On the third glance, Rhett saw the dog's gaze fixed on him, not with accusation, not with forgiveness, but with the simple fact of recognition. Rhett looked back to the road before the pressure behind his eyes could become something else. Copperglass appeared slowly at the bottom of the valley. A church steeple, the water tower, smoke lifting from chimneys. The gas station sign blinking half-heartedly in the cold. He drove straight past all of it to the veterinary clinic at the south end of town. Copperglass Animal Care occupied a low timber building with a green metal roof and a ramp shoveled clean down the middle. A wind chime made of old horseshoes knocked softly near the door. Rhett parked across 2 spaces without caring, lifted Bastian from the back seat, and carried him inside. Warm air met them at once, carrying the clean smell of antiseptic, cedar shavings, and coffee left too long on a warmer. A woman looked up from behind the counter. Dr. Nadja Elise Pruitt was not the kind of veterinarian who wasted movement. She came around the desk before Rhett finished speaking, her dark hair tied low at the nape of her neck, glasses sliding down her nose, sage-colored scrubs visible beneath a cream fleece jacket. "What happened?" she asked. "Found him on Coldwater Pass," Rhett said. "Rear legs bad, feet are torn up, cold exposure, dehydrated, I think." Nadja's eyes moved from the dog to Rhett's face, then back to the dog. She heard what he did not say. "Exam room 2, she said. "Set him down gently." Rhett obeyed. For the next several minutes, the room became clinical and precise. Nadja checked gums, pulse, temperature, paws, joints, eyes. She spoke to Bastian in a low, even voice while moving with practiced care. A veterinary assistant brought warm fluids and blankets. But Rhett barely registered the younger man's presence. His attention stayed on Bastian's breathing. "He's severely depleted," Nadja said at last. "Banged up, chilled, and that rear leg is sprained. I don't feel a fracture, but I'll confirm with imaging. The paws are in rough shape from distance. He's been moving through snow for a long while." "How long?" "At least a day, maybe more, depending on how often he stopped." She looked at him carefully. "You said you found him. Do you know him?" Rhett did not answer right away. He took the collar tag in his hand and turned it toward her. "I think I used to." Nadja scanned the microchip while Bastian lay wrapped beneath a warming blanket. The machine beeped once. She read the screen, then looked at Rhett with a change in her expression. Not surprise exactly, but the quiet weight of confirmation. "Registered name Bastian," she said. "Male German Shepherd, 9 years old, prior service canine. Last recorded handler contact." She paused. "Rhett Lawson Kendry." The room seemed to lose all sound. Rhett rested one hand against the edge of the treatment table. Nadja did not soften her voice too much. He appreciated that. "He's yours?" she asked. Rhett looked down at Bastian. The dog's eyes were half open now, fixed on him through exhaustion. "I don't know what he is anymore," Rhett said, "but he was." Nadja nodded once, accepting the answer without prying into it. She treated the paws, started fluids, gave medication to ease pain and inflammation, and told Rhett that Bastian had arrived in time. That phrase stayed in the air longer than she probably intended. Arrived in time. Rhett had spent 5 years not arriving anywhere in time. While Nadja stepped out to prepare additional notes, Rhett used the number on the North Star Ridge tag. It rang until the call failed. He tried again. Nothing. He called the county dispatch line and gave the tag information. The operator recognized North Star Ridge House, but said their scheduled radio check had not come through that morning. A storm had passed high on the ridge overnight. Crews were already dealing with downed trees and blocked roads. Dispatch promised to attempt contact through alternate channels. Rhett hung up and stared at the beacon, still blinking weakly beside the collar. Bastian had not wandered into the road by chance. Someone had sent him, or he had left because no one else could. Rhett pulled a chair close to the treatment table. His knee ached from the morning cold, but he ignored it. Slowly, he placed his bare hand near Bastian's head, not on him, not yet asking for anything. The shepherd shifted just enough to rest his muzzle against Rhett's fingers. 5 years earlier, Rhett had believed the world had taken Bastian away from him. Now Bastian had come back through snow, pain, and distance. But as Rhett looked at the North Star Ridge tag and the dying red blink of the emergency beacon, he understood one thing with a certainty that settled deeper than fear. Bastian had not come back only to be found. He had come back because someone else was still waiting. Bastian stayed at Copperglass Animal Care for 2 days. The clinic had a recovery room at the back of the building, small and windowless except for a narrow pane high on the north wall. In the morning, pale winter light came through it in a thin bar and rested across the floor like a ruler. At night, the room belonged to the quiet mechanical sounds of care, the slow drip of fluids, the low hum of a warming pad, the soft click of Nadja Pruitt's shoes whenever she came in to check him. Rhett stayed longer than anyone asked him to. At first, Nadja told him he could wait in the lobby. Then she suggested he go home, shower, sleep, eat something that did not come from a vending machine. By the second evening, she stopped suggesting. He had taken the chair nearest Bastian's table and made it his post. Sometimes he sat with both elbows on his knees, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the shepherd's breathing. Sometimes he stood at the counter and stared at the small tray holding Bastian's collar, tag, and emergency beacon. The red light had stopped blinking by then. The battery had finally given out sometime after midnight. Rhett did not like how much that bothered him. It was only a light. Still, when it went dark, the room felt colder. Bastian slept through most of the first day. When he woke, it was never suddenly. His amber eyes would open halfway, unfocused for a few seconds, then settle on Rhett. Each time, Rhett felt the same careful pressure rise in his chest, as if some old door had opened an inch and he did not yet know what waited behind it. He spoke to the dog in fragments, not the way people spoke to pets, the way men spoke at night when they believed no one was listening closely enough to judge the shape of the words. Easy. Stay down. Good. Once, when Nadja stepped out to take a call, Rhett leaned closer and whispered, "Mark left." Bastian's ear twitched. Rhett almost smiled. "Still remember that one, huh?" Mark left had been a field command, plain enough to mean nothing to most people, precise enough to move Bastian 3 feet to Rhett's left without a leash, a touch, or a second word. Years ago, the dog had known dozens of those commands. Some were official. Others had grown between them over time, made from routine, weather, and need. "Anchor," Rhett said softly. Bastian's eyes opened again. He did not move. Nadja had made it clear movement was not allowed unless necessary, but the dog's gaze sharpened, and his tail gave one faint motion beneath the blanket. Rhett looked away first. For 5 years, he had trained himself not to say that word. Anchor had not been for the field, not originally. It had started as a private correction during long waits beside medical transport vehicles, when Rhett's own breathing would get too fast, and Bastian, somehow aware before anyone else, would press his body against Rhett's leg and hold there until the world became measurable again. After the injury, after the discharge, after the rooms with beige walls and polite voices, Rhett had needed an anchor more than ever, and he had answered by cutting the line. The memory did not come all at once. It returned in pieces across those 2 days, each piece small enough to deny until they began to arrange themselves into something he could not avoid. A transport route under bad weather, a call to move faster than was wise, a vehicle that slid where it should not have, men shouting over wind. Bastian pressed against his side. Then the clean white ceiling of a medical facility and the feeling that his left leg belonged to someone else. The doctors had used measured language: recovery, limitation, transition, medical separation. Rhett remembered nodding at the right times. He remembered signing forms. He remembered Truman Becksayer standing beside the bed, broad-shouldered and gray-eyed, looking older than 60 even though he had not yet reached it. "You focus on getting back up," Truman had told him. "I'll hold Bastian until you're ready." Rhett remembered grabbing Truman's sleeve. Not hard. He had not had the strength. "Don't let them move him around," Rhett had said. "Don't let him disappear into another program." "I won't. Say it." Truman had held his gaze. "I promise." That was the last clear thing Rhett trusted. Everything after came in fog. Rehabilitation appointments he skipped. Letters he placed unopened in a drawer. Voicemails he deleted without listening because the sound of anyone from that life made his hands turn cold. A move from one rental to another. A month when he lived above a repair garage and did not tell anyone where he had gone. He had told himself he was recovering in his own way. What he had really done was make himself unreachable, then call it being left alone. By the time the envelope came, it was late autumn. He still remembered the paper. Thin, official, folded twice. Truman's name printed where Rhett's should have been. Transfer of ownership. Bastian listed under Truman Becksayer. Rhett had read no farther than that. He had put the document into a metal drawer, closed it, and never opened it again. From that day on, the story became simple because simple stories hurt less. Truman had taken the dog. Truman had broken the promise. Rhett had been betrayed. A man could survive betrayal better than he could survive the possibility that he had been the one who failed to answer. On the second afternoon, Nadja came into the recovery room with a tablet in one hand and her glasses pushed up into her hair. "I found more in the chip registry," she said. Rhett looked up. Nadja did not sit. She leaned one hip against the counter, professional enough to keep the information organized, human enough not to turn it into a report. "Bastian was retired from active work after your separation. There was an interim ownership period under Truman Becksayer. 3 years ago, he updated Bastian's residence to North Star Ridge House." Rhett's jaw tightened at the name. Nadja saw it. "You know him. I knew him. That's not the same answer." "No," Rhett said. "It isn't." She waited a moment, then continued. North Star Ridge is listed as a veteran recovery residence, adult residence only. Transitional support, winter placement, physical recovery, counseling coordination, that kind of thing. I know what it is. You've been there. No. Nadja's expression did not change, but something in her silence suggested she had heard more than the word. Before Rhett could decide whether to say anything else, someone knocked on the open doorframe. A woman stood there with a folded map under one arm and snow still melting on the shoulders of her red rescue jacket. She was in her early 50s, strong without looking heavy, with a short practical cut of ash-blonde hair tucked behind one ear. A silver whistle hung at her chest, and her eyes had the pale, steady focus of someone who did not enjoy guessing when lives might depend on facts. "Rhett Kendry?" she asked. He stood. "Who's asking?" "Jessa Rayburn, County Search and Rescue." She stepped in, nodded once to Nadja, then looked at Bastian, not with pity but evaluation. "Dispatch said you found a dog carrying a North Star tag and an emergency beacon." Rhett pointed to the tray. Jessa crossed the room and examined the items without touching them at first. Then she pulled on gloves, lifted the beacon, checked the casing, and turned the reflective fabric between her fingers. "This isn't decoration," she said. "No," Rhett replied. "It was tied in a hurry, but not carelessly." She held the fabric closer to the light, safety vest material. "Someone wanted this seen if the dog reached a road." Nadja folded her arms. "Can you reach the residence?" "Not yet. Main line is down. Radio check failed this morning. Road crews are clearing a slide near the north access. We also have reports of trees down around the old relay spur." Jessa placed the beacon back on the tray. "Could be temporary, could be worse. We don't know." "Then go," Rhett said. Jessa looked at him. "We are assessing access. That's a polite way of saying waiting. That's a precise way of saying assessing access." Rhett stepped toward her. "A dog walked down from that ridge injured and half frozen. Someone sent him. I agree. Then, what else do you need? A safe route, weather clearance, a team, communications that work, and confirmation we aren't sending more people into a blocked corridor blind." Her voice did not rise. "That's what I need." Rhett felt the old heat climb into his throat, the kind that came when someone stood between him and action. It was not anger exactly. Anger was too simple. This was fear wearing boots. "I know that country," he said. "I worked snow machines up there. I can get you in." "You can get yourself in trouble. That isn't the same thing." Nadja spoke before Rhett could, "And Bastian is not going anywhere today." Rhett turned toward her. Nadja removed her glasses from her hair and put them back on, a sign he was learning meant she had finished being patient. "He needs fluids, rest, wound care, and imaging. His rear leg is sprained. His paws are damaged from distance and ice. If you put him back on a mountain today because your conscience is louder than your judgment, you may undo the only good thing that happened to him when you found him." The room went still. Bastian breathed steadily beneath the blanket. Rhett looked from Chija to Jessa, then to the collar on the tray. "They may not have until tomorrow," he said, quieter. Jessa's face changed then, not softening, but allowing the truth in. "I know, that was what stopped him. Not permission, not refusal, the fact that she knew and still did not rush." Jessa opened the folded map on the counter. It was a county terrain map sealed in plastic, marked with grease pencil in red and blue. Nadja cleared a space among the medical notes. Rhett moved closer despite himself. "North access is compromised here," Jessa said, pointing. "Slide along Wheeler Cut. We're still waiting on depth reports. Relay spur is here. If the tower is down, that explains the radio silence." Rhett studied the map. The printed roads looked cleaner than the mountain ever was. "What about South Timber?" he asked. Jessa glanced at him. "Closed years ago. Closed to regular vehicles. Not gone. It runs through old logging ground." "I know. Of course you do," she said, not quite approving. Rhett placed a finger near the lower ridge, just east of Coldwater Pass. "There used to be a winter haul route here. Snowcats ran supplies through in deep season before the county stopped maintaining it." Jessa leaned over the map. "Not on this version." "No, because this version was made after the timber company sold the land." Nadja looked between them. "Is it passable?" Rhett did not answer too fast. That mattered. He forced himself to see it as it might be now, not as memory wanted it to be. Maybe. Depends on wind load and downed trees. Jessa tapped the map once. Maybe is not a route. Before Rhett could respond, Bastian stirred. It was not much at first. A shift beneath the blanket, a low breath. Then his head lifted. All three turned, Bastian's eyes fixed on the map. Easy, Nadja said, moving toward him. The shepherd pushed against the table with his front legs. Not enough to rise, but enough to make the warming blanket slide. Rhett stepped in, ready to steady him, but Bastian was not trying to stand. His gaze stayed locked on the map. Jessa went very still. "Does he understand maps?" she asked. Rhett almost said no. Then he remembered field tables, route briefings, Bastian underfoot, watching hands move over paper while men decided where danger began. "He understands when people are choosing a direction," Rhett said. Bastian gave a faint, rough sound and stretched his neck toward the counter. Nadja frowned. "Don't let him strain." Rhett picked up the map and lowered it carefully to the edge of the table, far enough that Bastian would not have to move much. The dog's nose hovered over the plastic. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Bastian pressed his muzzle against the lower southern ridge. Not the main road, not Wheeler Cut, the old Winter Hall route. Rhett stopped breathing. Jessa's eyes narrowed, not in disbelief, but in concentration. She moved closer and marked the spot with her thumb. "He came down near Coldwater," she said. "Yes, and this route connects to the backside of North Star? If the lower bridge still holds, if the west switchback isn't buried, if the trees haven't closed it. That is a lot of ifs. It's more than we had 10 minutes ago." Jessa looked at him for a long moment. Then she refolded the map with the southern route exposed. "Here is how this works," she said. "I don't care what you did before, and I don't care how well you know that dog. This is county rescue. If we move as a team. You do not lead unless assigned. You do not improvise unless ordered. You do not take that animal beyond what Dr. Pruitt allows." Rhett's first instinct was to reject every word. His second instinct was older, quieter, and far more painful. "Listen." He looked down at Bastian, who had already spent more strength than he should have just to point them toward a road. "All right," Rhett said. Jessa studied him as if deciding whether the words were real. "You'll advise terrain only. We wait for weather, gear, and medical clearance. Earliest window is tomorrow morning." Rhett nodded once. Nadja adjusted Bastian's blanket back into place. The dog's eyes were closing again, exhausted by the small effort. Rhett rested his palm beside Bastian's head, close enough for the shepherd's breath to warm his fingers. Jessa stepped toward the door, then paused. "Mr. Kendry," he looked up. "If Truman Sayer sent this dog down the mountain, he believed someone at the other end would understand." Rhett said nothing. Jessa left the room, carrying the map beneath one arm. The clinic settled again into its measured sounds. Fluid drip, heater hum, Bastian breathing. Rhett remained beside the table. For 5 years, he had feared that Truman had broken a promise and taken from him the last living piece of a life he could not bear to lose. But sitting there in the dim recovery room, with the North Star tag on the tray and Bastian asleep under Nadja's careful watch, Rhett felt a worse fear take shape. Not that Truman had betrayed him, not even that Rhett had been wrong. The fear was that Truman Beck Sayer, stubborn, loyal, impossible Truman, might be trapped somewhere above the timberline, and Rhett still wanted him alive. By morning, Copperglass looked almost harmless. The storm that had crossed the ridge overnight left the town shining under a hard blue sky. Snowbanks glittered along the shoulders of the streets. Icicles hung from the eaves of the clinic and caught the sun in bright, brittle lines. From inside the recovery room, the world beyond the narrow window seemed quiet enough to forgive. Rhett did not trust quiet weather. He stood beside Bastian's table while Dr. Nadja Pruitt checked the shepherd's paws one last time. The dog was awake now, not strong but clearer. His eyes followed each movement in the room with the old patience Rhett remembered. The fluids had put something back into him, not youth, not ease, but presence. "That does not mean he is recovered," Nadja said without looking up. Rhett glanced at her. "I didn't say anything. You were about to think it loudly. He almost answered, then let it go. Nadja wrapped Bastian's rear leg with careful pressure, then checked the protective coverings on his paws. He can ride. He can stand briefly. He can walk only if there is no other option and only for a short distance. If he limps harder, slows suddenly, refuses weight, shakes, or loses focus, he stops. No argument. Rhett nodded. Nadja held his gaze until the nod became a promise rather than a reflex. I mean it, she said. He already did more than he should have. Rhett looked down at Bastian. The shepherd's right ear tilted outward, and his muzzle had gone gray around the edges. There had been a time when Bastian could cross broken ground all day and still rise at a whisper. That time was gone. Pretending otherwise would not honor him. I hear you, Rhett said. Jessa Rayburn arrived 10 minutes later with a county tablet, 2 printed maps, and the calm face of a woman who had already made 3 difficult decisions before breakfast. Her red rescue jacket was half-zipped, reflective strips catching the light each time she moved. We have partial confirmation on his route, she said. She set the tablet on the counter. A grainy image filled the screen, a night camera from the Coldwater fuel station, snow streaked across the lens. At the far edge of the frame, just beneath the pump lights, a shape moved through the wind. Bastian, not running, not wandering, moving with purpose. That was 7:18 yesterday evening, Jessa said. He passed the fuel station, but didn't stop. Camera 2 catches him turning behind the old maintenance yard. Rhett knew the yard before she finished the sentence. His yard. The small snow equipment shop where he repaired county machines, private plows, and anything else that could break in freezing weather. Bastian had gone behind it, past the stacked pallets and fuel cage, then back toward the road. He knew the place, Jessa said. Rhett stared at the image. It was not miracle, it was memory. In the past few months, supply drivers from North Star Ridge House had come through his yard for fuel cans, chain repair, and heater parts. He had seen the trucks. He had once heard a dog bark from the covered back of one of them. He had ignored it because ignoring things had become a skill. Bastian had not ignored him. The shepherd had passed close enough to smell oil on his gloves, hear his voice through an open bay door, maybe even recognize the rhythm of the man he had once followed across deserts, hangars, and winter roads. All that time, Bastian had known. Rhett had been the one who had not looked. Jessa changed the image to a map marked with time estimates. Tracks near the south tree line matched the direction we discussed. A road crew found impressions along the old hall entrance before wind covered most of them. Beacon data gives us one more point here. She tapped the screen. Then the battery died, Rhett said. Yes, but it is enough to build a line. Nadja stepped beside them. And the line says, Jessa looked toward the window, where the mountains rose white and sharp beyond the town. He left North Star yesterday afternoon, came down through the South Timber, crossed near Coldwater, reached the fuel station after dark, and made it to the road where Mr. Kendry found him this morning. Rhett felt the distance in his body. That was not a lost dog's drift. That was a message traveling on 4 tired legs. He was sent, Rhett said. Jessa did not soften the conclusion. Likely. Nadja gathered a small medical pack for Bastian. Then someone at North Star was still organized enough to prepare him. That matters, Jessa said. It means they were not in immediate chaos when he left. It also means conditions may have changed since. The words stayed in the room. May have changed. Rhett reached for Bastian's collar and ran his thumb over the North Star tag. The metal was scratched from travel. The strip of reflective fabric had stiffened with dried ice. He imagined Truman tying it there. Truman's large hands, Truman's habit of checking knots twice, Truman refusing to show fear in front of others. For 5 years, Rhett had made the man into a thief in his mind. Now, with every new fact, that image lost its edges. Not vanished, not forgiven, but weakened. The rescue team assembled at the South Equipment lot an hour later. Laurel Winsome Price was already there when Rhett arrived, standing beside a tracked snow vehicle with the engine hatch open and a wrench between her teeth. She was shorter than him by several inches, solid through the shoulders, with red-brown hair tucked under a burnt orange knit cap. Her mustard yellow snow jacket had a white fox patch sewn on one sleeve, and she moved around the machine with the easy irritation of someone who trusted engines more than people. She pulled the wrench from her mouth and looked Rhett over. "You the terrain oracle?" "No." "Good," she said. "Oracles usually don't know how to strap gear properly." Jessa walked past them without slowing. "Laurel runs the vehicle. What she says about weight, speed, and ice load is not a suggestion." Rhett said nothing. Laurel gave him a grin that was too sharp to be friendly and too honest to be rude. "You can sit behind me and hate my driving quietly." 2 EMTs loaded medical bags, warming blankets, and portable oxygen into the rear compartment. One was a broad man named Callum Price, who had the calm, heavy hands of someone used to working in bad weather. The other, Mina Velasquez, was compact and quick, her dark braid tucked into her jacket as she checked each kit twice. Nadja arrived with Bastien in the back of her clinic van. She did not let anyone rush the dog. Together, she and Rhett settled him onto a padded platform secured inside the snow vehicle. Bastien lay with his head raised, eyes alert, body wrapped and protected. Rhett climbed in after him. The moment the door shut, the engine became the loudest thing in the world. They left Copperglass behind and moved into the timber. The first miles were clean. The old haul route ran beneath tall pines. The snow packed hard where wind had pressed it flat. Sunlight broke through the branches in shifting pieces, bright enough to hurt the eyes. Every ridge looked simple from below, every open slope innocent until the vehicle drew near and revealed buried drifts, fallen limbs, and places where ice had formed under powder. Rhett watched too closely. "Drift pocket ahead," he said after 20 minutes. Laurel did not turn, saw it. "You'll want to stay high left." "I am staying high left. That lower track drops. Does it now?" Jess's voice came from the front passenger seat. "Mr. Kendry." Rhett shut his mouth. 10 minutes later, he did it again. "Watch the creek cut." Laurel slowed the vehicle, guided it across a narrow snow bridge, and only then glanced back. "You know, experience and control are not twins. They're more like cousins who don't always get invited to the same meal." Mina, seated near the medical gear, hid a smile. Rhett looked down at Bastien instead of answering. The dog watched him, not judging, not approving, just present. That was worse than being corrected. For years, Rhett had turned concern to instruction. If he could tell someone what to do, he did not have to admit he was afraid of what might happen if he stayed silent. With Bastien hurt behind him and North Star waiting somewhere above them, every mile tempted him to seize the wheel in one form or another. But the vehicle did not need him to drive. The team did not need him to command. They needed what he knew, when it was useful, and nothing more. So he began to wait. When Jessa asked, he answered. When Laurel slowed and looked back, he pointed out old markers half buried in snow, a split cedar, a rusted cable hook, the faint raised line of a drainage ditch beneath white cover. The shift was small. It cost him more than he expected. Near midday, the route narrowed between a steep bank and a stand of young firs bowed low by snow. Laurel brought the vehicle to a halt before a wall of fallen trees. "End of the scenic drive," she said. 3 trunks crossed the old road at different angles. Not impossible, but not quick. Branches tangled across the snow like woven wire. Jessa stepped out first. The air was bright and brutally cold. Everyone moved more slowly outside the vehicle, not from hesitation, but from respect for the place. Callum checked the slope. Mina marked their position. Laurel inspected the trees and muttered something unkind about wind direction. Rhett studied the terrain. "There used to be a bypass below the fur stand," he said. "Narrow, but it cuts around and meets the road above this rise." Jessa looked at him. "Used to be." "Yes." Laurel crouched, brushing snow from the lower ground. "Animal tracks. Old machine scar, too, maybe. Could be your bypass." They needed confirmation. Jessa looked toward Bastien. Nadja was not there to glare at him, but Rhett heard her voice anyway. "Only if there is no other option." There was another option: spend hours cutting through the trunks. Time mattered. Rhett opened the rear hatch and crouched beside Bastien. "Short walk," he said. "Only if you know it." Bastian lifted his head. Laurel brought a support sling from the gear pack. Rhett fitted it carefully under the shepherd's chest and belly so the dog would not bear full weight on the injured leg. Bastian stepped down into the snow with deliberate care. No one spoke. The shepherd stood for a moment, nose lifted. Then he turned toward the first stand. Not fast, not dramatic, just certain. Rhett moved with him, one hand steady on the sling, letting Bastian choose the pace. The dog picked a path under low branches where old snow held the scent of passage better than the open road. After 20 yards, he paused, sniffed the air, and angled left. The others followed in a spaced line. The bypass existed, buried, narrow, but real. Laurel gave a low whistle. "I take back 1/4 of what I was thinking about you." "About me or the dog?" Rhett asked. The dog. For the first time that day, Rhett almost laughed. They had gone perhaps 300 yards when Bastian stopped. This time it was not the alert stillness from the map room. It was quieter, personal. He lowered his head toward a mound near the base of a pine. Rhett helped him closer, then saw the edge of a strap protruding from the snow. "Bag," he called. Callum and Mina moved in. Together they uncovered a small medical pack, dark green canvas with frost hardened along the seams. One clasp had snapped. Inside were labeled medication sleeves, bandage rolls, a compact thermal wrap, and a folded waterproof sheet. Jessa unfolded it, a list of names. 8 adults remained checked in at North Star Ridge House. Truman Beck Sayer was marked as site manager. Lenora Page Duval, medical lead. Otis Bramwell Keene, maintenance. 5 residents listed with medication schedules beside their names. Mina exhaled slowly. This was not dropped by accident. "No," Jessa said. Someone was trying to preserve the med schedule if help came from outside. Rhett stared at Truman's name. There it was, in waterproof ink, not as the man who had taken Bastian, not as the figure Rhett had kept frozen in anger, but as the one responsible for 8 people on a ridge with failing access and limited supplies. Jessa folded the sheet carefully and placed it back into the pack. "This confirms occupancy," she said. "We continue."
"How far?"
Callum asked. Laurel checked the terrain. "If the bypass holds, we can regain the old road above the rise. After that, maybe 6 miles to the lower approach." Jessa looked at Bastian. "He rides from here." Rhett did not argue. He helped Bastian back toward the vehicle, feeling how much effort the short distance had cost the dog. Bastian's breathing stayed even, but his body leaned slightly into the support sling. "You did enough," Rhett murmured. Bastian looked ahead, toward the unseen ridge. Far above them, North Star Ridge House held its own fragile line against the cold. Truman Beck Sayer sat in the facility's utility room with his left boot unlaced and his ankle wrapped in a compression bandage. Pain had made his face pale beneath the weathered red of his skin, but he kept his voice steady whenever someone came near. He had a thick chest, cropped silver hair, and the broad hands of a man who had spent his life carrying more than he named. "You should be lying down," Lenora Page Duval said. She stood over him with a clipboard. A small flashlight clipped to her cardigan, and the unimpressed expression of a former medic who had heard every excuse. Her dark and silver braid rested against one shoulder, and an old nurse's watch was pinned to her pocket. "I am lying down emotionally," Truman said. "Then your emotions are putting weight on that ankle." Across the room, Otis Bramwell Keene had half his upper body inside the generator housing. His white mustache was smudged with machine grease, and a yellow-handled screwdriver stuck from the pocket of his flannel shirt. "I can keep her coughing," Otis called, "but I can't make her sing. Not without fuel in a part we don't have." Lenora checked the fuel gauge. The needle sat too low. "How long?" Otis slid out from the machine and wiped his hands on a rag. "Less than 36 hours if we keep heat limited to the main rooms." Truman closed his eyes for 1 second. Only one. Then he opened them. "Then we keep everyone in the main rooms." Lenora looked toward the window, where the mountain fell away into white distance. "And Bastian?" Truman's hand tightened around the arm of the chair. "He knows the road," he said. It sounded like faith. It also sounded like fear. "Back in the timber below. Bastian lay secured inside the snow vehicle again as Laurel guided them onto the upper part of the Hall Road. The sun had begun its slow turn westward, and shadows lengthened between the trees. Rhett sat beside the dog with the recovered medical pack braced against his boot. The list inside it had made everything real in a way the beacon had not. 8 people. Fuel under 36 hours, if the worst assumptions were true. A road that might close behind them as easily as ahead. Bastian opened his eyes. Rhett followed the dog's gaze to the white slope rising beyond the trees. The shepherd had already crossed half the story alone. Now the road turned back toward the place he had left. And Rhett understood, with a heaviness that was no longer only grief, that finding Bastian had been the easy part. Bringing him home would ask much more. By late afternoon, the wind on the upper ridge had stopped sounding like weather. It had become a force with intention. It came down through the pines in hard, invisible waves, shaking loose snow from branches and driving fine crystals across the old Hall Road until the world ahead of the rescue vehicle turned flat and white. Laurel kept both hands fixed on the controls, her jaw set, her eyes narrowed behind the windshield. Jessa called the halt before anyone else argued for it. "There's a ranger station less than a mile ahead," Rhett said, looking through the side window at a shape he almost recognized beyond the trees. "I know," Jessa replied. "That's why we're stopping." He heard the answer behind the answer. She had not stopped because she was uncertain. She had stopped because going forward in bad visibility would turn experience into gambling. The old ranger station sat in a hollow below the ridge, half buried in snow and surrounded by firs bent under winter weight. Its green paint had faded to the color of moss on stone. One shutter hung loose, knocking softly each time the wind shifted. The place had been retired from regular use years ago, but county crews still kept it stocked for weather holds and emergency shelter. Laurel eased the tracked vehicle beside the porch. Callum and Mina carried in medical gear first. Jessa checked the structure, the stovepipe, and the emergency radio, while Laurel went around back to inspect the fuel drum. Rhett stayed with Bastian until the others had cleared a warm corner near the old iron stove. Getting the shepherd inside took patience. Bastian did not complain. That was his way. He only lowered his head and let Rhett and Callum guide him onto a padded mat near the heat, the support sling still tucked beneath his chest. The moment Bastian settled, the room changed. It did not become safe. Not fully. North Star Ridge House still sat somewhere above them, unreachable for the night. 8 adults still depended on a road the mountain was trying to erase. But with Bastian breathing steadily beside the stove, the shelter no longer felt abandoned. Mina draped a blanket over the dog's back and checked his paws with practiced hands. "He's stable," she said. Tired but stable, Rhett crouched beside him. "Good." Bastian's amber eyes opened halfway. His gaze moved once to Rhett, then toward the door, as if he could still feel the direction of the place he had left. "I know," Rhett whispered. "Not yet." The words were for the dog. They were also for himself. Night came early under the ridge. The pale blue daylight drained from the windows, and the station filled with the orange pulse of the stove. Snow scraped along the walls, gear dried from pegs. The team moved in quiet efficiency, each person finding work that kept the waiting from becoming fear. Laurel stripped ice from a tension cable and laid tools on a folded tarp. Callum checked batteries. Mina inventoried medication from the recovered pack and compared it with the list from North Star. Jessa sat at the small desk beneath the radio shelf, trying to pull information through the thin thread of satellite connection her county tablet could find. Rhett did not know what to do with stillness. He had spent years choosing solitude, but solitude was different from waiting with others. Alone, a man could make silence obey him. In a room full of people, silence kept its own shape. He stood near the window, looking out at nothing. After nearly an hour, Jessa spoke. "Kendry." He turned. She had removed one glove and was scrolling through a file that had finally loaded in fragments. The stovelight cut across her face, making her look carved rather than tired. "I received partial transfer records from the military canine registry," she said. "Not everything. Enough. Rhett's first instinct was to refuse, not with words. With the tightening in his shoulders, the turn of his head, the old defense that told him some doors stayed shut because opening them served no one. But Bastian shifted behind him. The soft movement of the blanket was enough. Rhett crossed the room. Jessa turned the tablet so he could see. "I'm not reading this to shame you. That usually means it will. It means I don't have time to manage your reaction. I need you clear tomorrow." Laurel muttered from the floor, "That's Jessa being gentle." Jessa ignored her. Rhett looked at the screen. Most of it was administrative language. Custody, retirement eligibility, interim placement, handler contact attempts, address verification, welfare hold, transfer extension, cold words, clean words, words that could hold 5 years of misunderstanding without carrying any of the weight. Jessa scrolled. "Truman Beck Sayer was listed as temporary custodian after your medical separation," she said. "The notes show he requested extension twice while waiting for handler response." Rhett said nothing. He called 3 numbers on file, 7 logged attempts. 4 letters were sent, 2 were returned, 1 was marked forwarded. There are 2 visitor logs from your treatment center showing he requested to see you. Rhett felt the room tilt, not visibly, not enough for anyone else to notice. "I don't remember that." Jessa's voice stayed even. "The logs say you declined both visits." He stared at the screen until the letters stopped looking like language declined. It was a small word, almost polite. It did not sound like the way he had lived then. It did not sound like curtains drawn at noon, unopened mail, hands shaking over a phone that would not stop lighting up. It did not sound like the hard numbness that came after too many well-meaning voices said recovery, as if the word were a road anyone could choose to walk. But it was true enough. He had declined. Maybe not Truman specifically, maybe everything. The unit, the paperwork, the dog, the man he had been. Jessa scrolled again. When the temporary hold expired, Bastian was eligible for reassignment. Sayer signed as adopter to prevent transfer. Later, he updated residence to North Star Ridge House. There are annual care records attached. She handed the tablet to him. Rhett held it carefully, as though careless fingers might damage the past further. There were photographs. Not many, low resolution, practical, attached for registration updates. Bastian standing outside a timber building in summer, coat full and bright, right ear tilted as always, Bastian lying in a hallway beside a closed bedroom door, head on his paws. Bastian beside a group of adult residents on a snowy porch, calm as a stone in a river. Bastian riding in the back of a supply truck, looking toward the camera with the same steady eyes Rhett had once believed belonged only to him. The last image made his throat close. It showed Truman kneeling beside the shepherd, near a sign that read North Star Ridge House. Truman looked older than Rhett remembered, hair almost entirely silver, face lined by weather and responsibility. One broad hand rested on Bastian's shoulder. Rhett wanted to hate the photograph. He could not, because Bastian did not look stolen. He looked needed. Rhett handed the tablet back. No one spoke for a while. The stove gave a soft pop as a knot in the wood split. Finally, Mina said from the supply table, quietly enough that it was not aimed at him, "A dog like that doesn't just belong to a place. He holds it together." Rhett looked at Bastian. The shepherd had fallen asleep again, but even in sleep his body faced the door. Rhett had spent 5 years telling himself that Truman had broken a promise. The story had protected him. It had let him keep his grief sharp and clean. It had given his isolation a villain, and a villain was easier to live with than a mirror. Now the record showed something uglier and kinder at the same time. Truman had tried. Rhett had vanished. And Bastian, the one creature Rhett thought had been taken from him, had spent those lost years doing what he had always done, staying near the people who needed him most. Later, when the others settled into short shifts of sleep, Rhett remained awake beside the stove. He did not touch the compass at his belt. He wanted to. His thumb moved toward it more than once, but he kept his hand open on his knee. Across the room, Bastian dreamed lightly. One paw twitched beneath the blanket. Rhett leaned back against the wall and let the night do what it had come to do. Not punish him, not forgive him, only show him the shape of what he had avoided. At dawn, the wind had dropped. The sky beyond the station windows burned pale gold along the ridge, and the snow outside shone so brightly it seemed lit from beneath. Cold had hardened everything. Footprints from the night before sat sharp-edged in the crust. Jessa studied the weather report, then folded the map with quick hands. "We move in 20, she said. No one wasted the morning with talk. Gear was packed. The stove was banked. Bastion was checked, wrapped, and secured in the vehicle. Rhett helped without being asked and stopped before doing anyone else's work for them. Laurel noticed. "Careful," she said, tightening a cargo strap. "Teamwork can sneak up on a man." Rhett gave her a tired look. "You always talk this much before sunrise? Only when someone makes it rewarding." The route above the ranger station climbed into more exposed country. Trees thinned, and the land opened into long white shoulders of snow broken by dark stone. The tracked vehicle moved slowly now. Even Laurel's jokes disappeared as she read the ground ahead. The old haul route had not vanished entirely, but it had become unreliable. In some places, wind had stripped it down to hardpack. In others, snow had gathered in deep pillows against the slope. After an hour, they reached a section too narrow for the vehicle to cross without scouting. Jessa ordered everyone out except Mina, who remained with gear and radio. Bastion lifted his head before Rhett reached for the sling. "No," Jessa said at once. "He stays unless needed." Rhett looked at the ridge ahead. "He is already telling us something. He is tired. He's focused." Jessa stepped closer. "Both can be true." Rhett looked down at Bastion. The shepherd was not restless. He was watching the slope with a stillness Rhett knew too well. A warning stillness. "Short distance," Rhett said. "Support sling. No pulling." Jessa hesitated, then nodded once. 10 minutes. If he strains, he goes back." Bastion stepped onto the snow with Rhett supporting part of his weight. The dog stood still, nose low, then lifted it toward the slope. The air was thin and brilliantly cold. No wind, no birds. Only the faint creak of snow settling. The route ahead bent along a white shelf beneath a rock wall. It looked passable, narrow but clean. Rhett saw it and felt relief rise too quickly. "That's the line," he said. Jessa studied the shelf. "Maybe." Rhett took one step forward. Bastion moved in front of him, not beside him. In front, the shepherd planted himself across Rhett's path and stiffened. "Bastion," Rhett said. "Easy." The dog did not move. Rhett tried the field tone without thinking. "Mark left." Bastion's ears shifted, but his body stayed where it was. A flicker of old frustration sparked in Rhett. Not anger at the dog, not really. Anger at delay. At the mountain. At Truman waiting somewhere above them. At himself for needing the animal to point the way and then refusing the answer when it came. "Bastion." "Move." "Nothing." Jessa said softly, "Kendry." Rhett lifted a hand, not to silence her, but because he was listening now. Bastion's paws pressed into the crust, his head angled toward the shelf. His tail was rigid, not tucked. His eyes did not leave the snow ahead. Then Rhett heard it, a faint sound beneath the surface, not a crack exactly, a hollow settling. Laurel, several yards behind them, lowered herself to one knee and brushed powder from the edge of the path. Her face changed. "Back," she said. No one argued. Rhett stepped away slowly, keeping the sling steady. Bastion backed with him, one careful step at a time. A few seconds later, the white shelf sagged. It did not collapse loudly. It simply gave way with a soft, terrible sigh, folding inward and dropping in a long section that revealed dark space beneath, a hidden cut in the rock filled with loose snow and shadow. The route they had almost taken was not a road. It was a lid. For several moments, no one spoke. The brightness of the morning made the opening look even darker. Laurel let out a slow breath. "Well, I deeply dislike being educated before coffee." Jessa looked at Bastion, then at Rhett. "He just saved us a very bad morning." Rhett could not answer. He crouched beside the shepherd in the snow. Bastion leaned faintly against the sling, tired from standing, but his gaze had softened now that the danger had passed. Rhett placed one hand against the dog's neck. Years ago, he would have measured loyalty by response. Command given, command followed, bond proven. But Bastion had not protected him by obeying. He had protected him by refusing. The realization moved through Rhett slowly, deeper than gratitude. For the first time since finding him on Coldwater Pass, Rhett understood that Bastian's life had not paused when Rhett disappeared. The dog had learned other rooms, other fears, other people's breathing. He had become wiser in ways Rhett had not been present to see. "You were right," Rhett said quietly. Bastian blinked once, as if the admission had been expected all along. They changed course. The new route forced them down through a stand of young spruce and around the base of the rock wall, adding miles they did not want and hours they did not have. Progress slowed. The vehicle had to reverse twice. Laurel and Callum cut branches in one narrow passage while Jessa recalculated their fuel and daylight. At midday, they stopped in a sheltered patch below the ridge to rest Bastian and check the team. Rhett removed the paw coverings and inspected each foot under Mina's guidance. The pads were tender but holding. The rear leg remained swollen, though no worse than before. Bastian rested his muzzle on Rhett's knee while Rhett rewrapped the protective layer. "I thought he was waiting for me all these years," Rhett said, not loudly. Mina was nearby, repacking a medical kit, but she did not pretend not to hear. Rhett looked toward the upper ridge. "Turns out he was living better than I was." Mina closed the kit. "Maybe he was waiting for you to catch up." Rhett gave a short breath that was not quite a laugh. When they moved again, the forest began to change. The spruce thinned, the ridge opened. Far ahead, above a rise of white ground and dark timber, something gray lifted into the sky. Smoke, thin, unsteady. But real. Jessa saw it at the same time and raised a hand for the team to stop. "There," Laurel said. No one cheered. The smoke meant warmth. It meant fire. It meant people still inside, still managing, still refusing to vanish into the weather. But as they drew closer, another detail emerged between the trees. A flicker of yellow light in one window, then darkness, then yellow again. The power inside North Star Ridge House was failing. Rhett stood beside Bastian on the white ridge, one hand resting lightly against the dog's back. The shepherd stared toward the smoke, ears lifted, body worn but steady. They had found the living thread. Now they had to reach it before it went out. North Star Ridge House did not appear all at once. It emerged in pieces through the trees. First the dark pitch of a roof beneath snow, then the long line of a porch rail, then a warm rectangle of window light struggling against the gray of late afternoon. The house sat on the high clearing, like it had been built by people who understood both loneliness and weather. Two timber wings stretched from a central lodge, with a utility shed near the tree line and a small flagpole leaning slightly in the wind. Snow had drifted high against the north wall. The porch steps had been cleared by hand, not recently enough to look easy, but recently enough to prove someone inside was still working. Laurel eased the tracked vehicle to a stop beside a half-buried supply trailer. No one rushed out immediately. Jessa raised one hand, listening. A generator coughed somewhere behind the building, uneven and tired. The sound faltered, recovered, then faltered again. It was not a machine that had much time left. "Power's barely holding," Laurel said. Rhett looked toward the closest window. The light inside dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. Bastian lifted his head from the padded platform. For the first time since leaving the clinic, the shepherd made a sound, not a bark, not a whine, but a low breath that carried recognition. Rhett's hand went to the support sling. Jessa stopped him with a look. "Slow. I know. Do you?" Rhett almost answered the old way. Sharp, defensive, certain that urgency excused tone. Instead, he nodded. Callum stepped down first, followed by Mina with the medical kit. Jessa approached the porch with her hands visible and called toward the door. "County Search and Rescue. We're here to assist." For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the door opened inward. A woman stood in the opening, small against the size of the lodge, but not diminished by it. Lindra Page Duval had a dark and silver braid pulled over one shoulder, a burgundy turtleneck under a gray cardigan, and a canvas medical pouch buckled at her waist. Her eyes moved quickly over the team, the vehicle, the gear, and finally Bastian. Only then did her face change. "Bastian," she said. The dog's tail moved once against the pad. Lenora stepped aside. Get him in before the wind turns. That was all the welcome there was. It was enough. Inside, North Star Ridge House smelled of wood smoke, coffee stretched too thin, wool blankets, and the faint electrical heat of equipment being asked to do more than it should. The central dining room had been turned into a command area. Tables were pushed together. Medication schedules were taped to one wall. Blankets were stacked by the fireplace. A hand-drawn chart listed room temperatures, fuel use, meal portions, and radio check attempts. Rhett had expected strain. He had expected fear. He had not expected order. A man with a white mustache and grease on both hands knelt beside a portable heater, tightening a fitting with a yellow-handled screwdriver. Two residents sorted canned food at a side table. Someone else was folding towels into neat piles near the fireplace. A woman in a heavy sweater was reading names from a clipboard while another resident marked them off. They were tired. That showed in the slowness of their movements and the way every chair seemed to pull at them. But they were not waiting helplessly. They were holding the house together one task at a time. Mina looked around and murmured, "They've been running this like a field station." Lenora heard her, because panic burns fuel faster than heat. Jessa nodded once, approving despite herself. "How many inside?" 8, including me and Truman, no one missing, no critical injuries. 2 need medication before morning. 1 needs warmth more than pride. Truman needs to stop pretending his ankle is a decoration. From the far side of the room, a dry voice called, "I heard that." Rhett turned. Truman Beck Sayer sat in a wooden chair near the utility hall, one boot unlaced, one ankle wrapped and elevated on an overturned crate. He looked older than the photograph from the registry, broader in the chest, but worn thinner around the eyes. His cropped silver hair caught the weak light from a nearby lamp. A heavy ring of keys hung from his belt, resting against the chair leg. For a moment, neither man moved. 5 years stood between them, not as memory, but as a physical thing in the room. Bastian shifted. That broke the spell. Lenora and Rhett guided the shepherd onto a blanket near the dining room stove. The reaction was immediate. The residents did not crowd him, but their faces turned toward him as if warmth had entered through another door. The man by the heater lowered his screwdriver. The woman with the clipboard pressed one hand against her chest. Bastian rose slowly, supported by Rhett's hand beneath the sling. He walked only a few steps, first to the man sitting nearest the fireplace, whose hands trembled from cold and exhaustion. Bastian stopped beside him and leaned his shoulder carefully against the man's knee. The man closed his eyes, placed one hand on the dog's neck, and breathed out as if he had been waiting 2 days for permission to do so. Then Bastian turned toward Lenora's chair and lowered himself beside it. The room settled around him. Rhett watched the movement of people around the dog. Not dramatic, not worshipful, familiar. This was not the way people looked at an animal that had visited. This was the way they looked at someone who belonged. Something inside Rhett shifted uncomfortably. Truman saw him watching. "You brought him back hurt," Truman said. The words were quiet, but they carried. Rhett turned toward him. "You sent him out hurt." The room went still enough for the generator's rough cough to sound louder. Truman's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "I sent him out walking. He got hurt getting help." He should never have been asked, and we should have sat here waiting for the radio to fix itself. You had people. I had people with limited heat, limited medication, no road, no signal, and a storm moving over the ridge. Truman's voice roughened. I had one dog who knew the supply line and one chance before the weather buried every track. Rhett stepped closer. He crossed 20 miles. He made it. He barely made it. Truman's eyes hardened, but he did. The old anger came up in Rhett fast enough to taste. 5 years of it. 5 years of a closed drawer and a paper with Truman's name on it. 5 years of imagining this man choosing possession over loyalty. "You had no right to make that choice for him," Rhett said. Truman's face changed then, and behind the anger Rhett saw something exhausted and almost wounded. "I made choices for him because you stopped making any." The words struck clean. No one moved. Then Lenora stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Enough. Both men looked at her. Lenora stepped between them, not physically large, but absolute. Bastian crossed that mountain. Jessa's team crossed after him. Everyone in this room has spent the last 30 hours doing the next necessary thing. I will not have the two of you turn that dog into a rope and start pulling from opposite ends. Rhett looked away first. Truman stared at the floor. Lenora's tone softened by a fraction. He finished his task. You can honor that by doing yours. Jessa allowed exactly 3 seconds of silence before taking command of the room. We need status. Fuel, heat, medical needs, vehicle access, alternate routes. The house returned to motion. Lenora reported medication schedules and resident conditions. Otis Bramwell Keene, the man with the white mustache and the yellow screwdriver, took Jessa and Laurel to the utility room, where the backup generator trembled on its mounts like an old engine trying not to quit. I borrowed a condenser line from a busted mower, Otis said, not without pride, and something from the kitchen fan that nobody better ask me about. Laurel crouched beside the machine. I am impressed and offended. You should be. It's ugly work. How long? Otis wiped his hands on a rag. Less than 30 hours if we keep the heat low and nobody gets sentimental with the lights. Fuel? Worse. Back in the dining room, Callum and Mina checked the residents one by one. No one was in immediate danger, but everyone was tired, chilled, and stretched thin. The problem was not a single emergency. It was accumulation, cold, fatigue, distance, a failing generator, a road that would not carry them all down safely before dark. Jessa studied the map on the cleared end of a dining table. Rhett stood opposite her, careful not to crowd. That restraint did not come easily, but the memory of Bastian stopping him on the snow shelf remained fresh. What about the main access after the slide? Jessa asked. Laurel shook her head. Not tonight, maybe with daylight and a plow team, not with evac passengers. The South Hall route we came up? Too narrow and too chewed up now. We can take small groups out, but not all 8 before dark. We risk losing the route on the return. Lenora placed a mug of coffee near Truman and ignored his attempt to refuse it. Some can stay another night, she said, but not comfortably, and not if the generator gives up. Mina added, 2 medication schedules get complicated by morning if we can't transport them. Truman leaned forward in his chair. Pain tightened his jaw, but he kept his voice steady. Take the residents first. I stay. No, Lenora said at once. It makes sense. It makes you feel noble. Different thing. Rhett almost smiled despite himself. Then his eyes drifted to the western wall of the lodge, where an old framed map hung near the fireplace. Not a county rescue map, a maintenance map. Faded, hand-marked, older than the ones Jessa carried. His breath slowed. He moved closer. The map showed service lines from another era. Water tank access, equipment sheds, old snow vehicle corridors, a power line service spur curling along the west side of the plateau. Rhett lifted the frame from the wall. Jessa looked over. What are you doing? Looking at something your map doesn't have. Laurel came to his side first. That's old. Yes, how old? Old enough to be useful if it was abandoned before someone erased it from the official routes. Jessa stepped beside them. Explain. Rhett pointed to a thin line west of the lodge. This was a maintenance corridor. Ran along the ridge shoulder to a power transfer hut, then dropped into the lower basin. Snow transports used it before the county consolidated access roads. Otis leaned on the doorframe of the utility hall. That line still exists in pieces. Everyone turned toward him. He shrugged. I used it last fall to haul scrap fencing. Not all the way down, but far enough to know it isn't completely gone. Laurel's eyes sharpened. Grade? Bad in spots. Width? Bad in other spots. That is not a technical assessment. It is an honest one. Rhett kept his finger on the map. If the corridor is open to the transfer hut, we can stage there, shorter runs. Less exposure than the south route. We don't have to move everyone at once. Jessa did not answer immediately. Rhett felt the urge to push, to insist, to turn memory into certainty. He stopped himself. This isn't a guarantee, he said. The words cost him. It's an option to verify. Jessa looked at him more closely then. Maybe she heard the difference. Can you prove it before we commit people to it? She asked. Not from this room. Then we don't commit. I know, Laurel crossed her arms. We can scout the first segment before full dark if we leave now. No passengers. Light gear, mark hazards, turn back at the transfer hut or earlier. Jessa looked toward the windows. Outside, the light was already thinning. No unnecessary risk, she said. Rhett nodded. Agreed. Truman's chair scraped as he tried to stand. Lenora pushed him back down with one hand on his shoulder. You will not. I know that route. And your ankle knows this chair. Truman glared at her. She glared back better. Jessa rolled the old map and tucked it under her arm. Kendry, Laurel, Callum. We scout to the first mile marker only. If the route is unstable, we return. No debate. Rhett looked toward Bastian. The shepherd lay beside Lenora's chair, watching him, tired, safe for the moment, surrounded by people who had clearly loved him in ways Rhett was only beginning to understand. For once, Rhett did not reach for the leash. He did not ask the dog to come. He only gave one small nod. Bastian's tail moved once against the floor. Jessa opened the lodge door, and a blade of cold evening air cut through the room. The west route waited beyond the trees, half memory, half possibility. This time, no one would follow it simply because Rhett remembered. This time, the mountain would have to prove him right. The western maintenance route began behind the utility shed, where the snow had drifted almost to the lower window frames, and the pines grew close enough to scrape the siding. Rhett stood at the edge of the trees with Laurel and Callum, studying a narrow depression that might once have been a road. Might was the word that mattered. The line existed, but barely. It dipped through young spruce, curved around a low ridge, and disappeared beneath a skin of wind-packed snow. There were no fresh tracks, no marked posts, no reassuring sign that a county crew had passed this way in recent memory. Behind him, North Star Ridge House glowed weakly through its windows. Bastian was inside. That fact left a strange emptiness beside Rhett's left leg. For years, even in memory, he had placed the dog at his side when making choices that frightened him. In the clinic, on the road, on the slope where Bastian had refused to move, Rhett had still looked to him. Now the shepherd was lying near the stove under Lenora's watch, exactly where he needed to be, and Rhett had to step forward without asking the dog to carry the weight of the decision. Laurel pulled her goggles down over her eyes. We scout to the first marker. If the route hates us, we let it hate us from a distance. Callum adjusted the medical pack on his shoulder. That is comforting in its own way. It wasn't meant to be, she said. Rhett looked at the tree line. There should be a transfer hut about 1.5 miles west. Should be, Laurel repeated, the most dangerous phrase in mountain maintenance. Jessa stood behind them with the old map folded under one arm. You three mark hazards, verify width, and return. No passengers, no heroics. If the corridor is blocked, we adapt. Rhett nodded, not because he liked being told, because this time he understood the order was not an insult. The first stretch was better than expected. Laurel walked ahead with a probe pole, testing depth and crust. Rhett followed slightly behind, reading old signs hidden in the land, the unnatural straightness between two rows of trees, a rusted marker half swallowed by bark, the shallow crown where the roadbed had once been built up over wet ground. Callum marked the safe line with bright flags. For 15 minutes, the route seemed willing to be found. Then they reached the fallen tree. It was not one trunk, but half of an old pine that had given way under snow weight and twisted across the corridor. Its branches were frozen into the surface, and beyond it a sheet of blue-white ice covered the road where meltwater had refrozen in layers. Laurel crouched, scraped the ice with her glove, and made a sound low in her throat. That's not friendly. Rhett stepped closer, then stopped before his old instinct carried him too far. He looked at the trunk, the ice, the angle of the slope, the narrow shoulder below. There was a version of him that would have tried to solve it with force. Cut the tree, winch the trunk, chop the ice, push the vehicle through, and trust skill to make up the rest. That version of him had nearly stepped onto a hollow shelf of snow the day before. He looked at Laurel. Can we clear enough for the vehicle? She stood and considered the problem. Not with what we're carrying. Could we with cable? Maybe. Callum glanced back toward the house. There's no time for maybe. Rhett looked again at the corridor. Not impossible, not safe yet. That distinction mattered more than pride. We go back, he said. Lifted her goggles. That was almost mature. Don't get attached to it. They returned to the lodge with the news. No one wasted energy pretending disappointment was useful. Otis listened from a chair near the utility room, one hand resting on his yellow-handled screwdriver. There's cable in the shed, he said, old logging cable, heavy, ugly, and probably offended we haven't used it. Laurel pointed at him. I like cable with personality. Within minutes, the house became a workshop. Otis directed 2 residents to the storage shelves. Callum and Mina sorted harnesses and blankets for the first evacuation group. Jessa drew a new timing grid on the back of an old supply sheet. Lenora moved through the dining room with her clipboard, assigning people not by rank, pride, or who volunteered loudest, but by condition. You first, she told a tall man who tried to object. I can wait. You can sit in a moving vehicle and be useful by not becoming my next problem. He sat. No one laughed loudly, but the room breathed easier. Rhett hauled the cable with Laurel, and 2 residents strong enough to help. He did not command them. He counted rhythm when they pulled. He warned about footing. He carried the heavier end without making a show of it. When one man slipped, Rhett caught his elbow and let go as soon as he was steady. Small things, hard things. Inside the lodge, Bastian lay in the center of the main room. Lenora had placed him where the warmth from the stove reached his blanket and where people passing through could see him. He did not rise, but his eyes opened whenever someone came near. One by one, residents sat beside him for brief moments. A woman with silver hair and a wool cap rested her hand lightly on his shoulder before joining the first group. A man who had been pacing near the windows crouched beside the dog and whispered something too low for anyone else to hear. Bastian leaned his head against the man's sleeve, and the pacing stopped. Rhett saw it through the doorway while coiling the cable. He had once thought Bastian's calm belonged to him because he had earned it. Now he understood it had never been a possession. It was a gift the dog gave wherever it was needed. The cable worked, not easily. Nothing on the ridge gave itself easily. The trunk groaned as Laurel operated the winch. Otis shouted advice from the shed door, despite Lenora ordering him to sit, and Rhett guided the cable angle with Jessa watching the slope. They did not remove the tree completely, they moved it enough. Then came the ice. Axes broke the upper crust. Shovels cleared loose chunks. Laurel spread traction mats. Callum and Rhett widened the shoulder with compacted snow until the tracked vehicle had just enough room to pass. By the time the first evacuation group was ready, the sky had turned the color of dull steel. Then the generator stopped. No dramatic shudder, no great noise. Just one final cough from the utility room, then silence. The lights went out. For a second, the lodge held its breath. Then Lenora's voice cut through the dark.
Lantern protocol.
Flashlights came on across the room, not frantic, planned. Small beams pointed at floors, bags, hands, doorways. Mina opened a case of thermal blankets. Callum lit 2 safe camp stoves near the ventilation area already cleared for them. One resident moved to close off the hallway doors. Another placed glow markers along the path to the exit. Otis muttered from the utility room. She quit polite at least. Lenora answered from the dining room. You may grieve the generator after everyone is warm. The room chuckled. Softly, but enough. Rhett stood in the dim light, watching a group of people move through a plan they had already prepared before rescue arrived. They had not needed saving from themselves. They had needed a bridge, a vehicle, a little more time, and enough hands to share the work. Jessa sent the first group down as twilight settled. Laurel drove. Callum rode with the passengers. Mina stayed to help Lenora prepare the second group. Rhett remained at the lodge, though every part of him wanted to ride the route and make sure it held. Jessa saw him watching the departing vehicle. They'll make the lower station, she said. I know. That answer sounded almost true. He looked at her. I'm working on it. The first run returned after what felt longer than the clock allowed. Laurel stepped out of the vehicle with ice on her jacket and a grin that looked like defiance. "Road's ugly, but it's ours for now." The second group loaded fast. Weather shifted during the process. Not a storm, not yet, but a veil of snow moved across the ridge and thickened the air. Visibility shortened. Sound became padded. Distances lied. Rhett reached automatically for the front passenger door. Jessa stopped him. "Laurel leads. I ride front. I know the corridor. You know the old corridor. Laurel knows how it is behaving right now. I can help her read. You can help from the middle vehicle position and monitor passengers." The old heat rose again. This time, Rhett recognized it before it became words. He looked toward Bastian inside the lodge. The shepherd lay still, watching him through the open door. Yesterday, Bastian had refused an order and saved him. Today, Rhett let someone else's order stand. He stepped back from the front door. "All right," he said. Laurel, already climbing in, glanced at him. "That hurt your soul a little, more than a little. Good, means it's stretching." The second run was slower. Rhett sat with two residents and checked on them as the vehicle crawled through the narrow western corridor. He watched gloves, breathing, posture, signs of cold. He adjusted a blanket that had slipped from one woman's shoulder. He passed water to a man who insisted he was fine until his hands shook too hard to open the cap. It was not command, it was care. He had forgotten how different the two could feel. By the time they returned for the last group, night had settled over North Star Ridge House. Only Truman, Lenora, Otis, Bastian, and the core rescue team remained. Truman refused to move until Bastian did. Lenora stood with her hands on her hips. "I am too tired to insult you creatively, then don't. You are getting in the vehicle." After him. Rhett expected anger in himself. Instead, he found understanding. He crossed the room and knelt beside Bastian. "We're going now, old man." Bastian lifted his head. Together, Rhett and Truman fitted the padded support under the shepherd. Truman's fingers brushed Rhett's once near the buckle. Both men paused, not long enough for anyone else to make a moment of it. Then they continued. No one claimed the leash. Rhett supported Bastian's chest. Truman steadied the rear sling from his chair until Callum took over. Lenora wrapped the blanket. Mina checked the paw coverings. 4 people helped one dog cross 10 feet of floor, and somehow that felt like the truest thing that had happened all day. Outside, the cold was sharp and clean. They loaded Bastian onto the padded platform in the vehicle, then helped Truman in last. Lenora climbed beside him, still holding her clipboard as if the mountain might respect paperwork. The descent took nearly 2 hours. No one spoke much. The snow thinned as they lost elevation. The trees grew taller again, less bent by wind. At last, the lower basin opened beneath them, and distant lights from copper glass appeared like a scatter of stars that had fallen to earth. When the final vehicle rolled into the clinic lot, dawn had begun to loosen the eastern sky. The sun broke through a seam in the clouds just as the doors opened. Gold light spilled across the snow, across the vehicles, across the exhausted faces of people who had done only their parts and somehow made a whole rescue out of them. Bastian was carried inside first, not because he was more important than the others, because everyone agreed he had already walked far enough. Rhett and Truman ended up on the bench outside the exam room while Nadja checked the dog. Neither man looked rested, neither looked ready to forgive. Truman's ankle was propped on a folded blanket. Rhett's hand still smelled faintly of cold metal and dog fur. For a long while they sat without speaking. On the other side of the door, voices moved quietly around Bastian. At last, Truman said, he always hated being fussed over. Rhett looked at the closed door. "No," he said softly. "He just tolerated it better than we do." Truman gave the smallest breath of a laugh. It did not fix 5 years, but for the first time in all that time, the 2 men were waiting on the same side of a door. For 3 weeks, Bastian belonged to the quiet hours. He slept more than he used to. That was the first thing Rhett had to accept, and somehow it was harder than the mountain had been. Action had rules. Weather had signs. Machines explained themselves through sound, heat, pressure, and resistance. Rest asked for trust. At Copperglass Animal Care, Dr. Nadja Pruitt made that clear without dressing the truth in comfort. He can live well, she told Rhett on a gray morning while Bastian stood patiently on the clinic mat. But he is finished with hard rescue work. No long tracks through deep snow, no extended climbs, no carrying everyone's emergency on his body. Bastian looked older in the clean cut of the exam room. His yellow and black coat had regained some fullness, and the swelling in his rear leg had gone down, but the stiffness remained. When he shifted weight, it was careful, not weak. His right ear still angled outward, giving him the same slightly questioning look Rhett remembered from years before. Rhett kept one hand on the edge of the exam table. "Can he ride with me?" Nadja adjusted her glasses and looked at him over the rims. "That depends on what you mean by ride. Truck, short routes, town, North Star sometimes, warm bedding, no jumping down from the cab, no pretending a good day means he is young again." Rhett nodded. Nadja waited. He gave her the full answer. "No pretending." Only then did she smile a little. "That is the part I wanted to hear." Bastian went home with Rhett that afternoon. The cabin at the edge of Copperglass had never felt empty to Rhett before. He had chosen its spareness carefully. One table, 2 chairs, a stove, a bed, a workbench in the back room. Shelves organized by function, not memory. But when Bastian stepped inside, slow and steady, the place seemed suddenly underfurnished in a way Rhett had never noticed. He set a thick dog bed beside the iron stove and moved a braided rug near the door so Bastian would not slip. He built a low ramp for the truck before sunset. By the next morning he had rearranged the mudroom, cleared one shelf for medication, and written the timing on a card in block letters. There had been a time when he would have called such details discipline. Now he understood them as care. Bastian accepted the cabin without ceremony. He inspected the stove, the kitchen, the bedroom door, and the front window. Then he lay down where he could see both Rhett and the road. Rhett sat across from him with a mug of coffee cooling in his hand. For years he had imagined what it would feel like if Bastian came back. He had imagined relief, anger, vindication, maybe even the clean collapse of grief into joy. The truth was quieter. Bastian had come home, carrying another home with him. That became clear the first Friday Rhett drove him back to North Star Ridge House. The road had been cleared by then, widened in 2 narrow places and marked with new reflective posts. The west maintenance corridor had been surveyed, logged, and entered into the county rescue map after Jessa Rayburn spent an entire afternoon making sure no one would call memory a route again, without proof. North Star itself had changed, but not in the way people in town predicted. It did not close. It also did not turn overnight into some grand project with banners, cameras, and speeches. The county board, 2 veterans organizations, and the rescue office agreed on something smaller and harder to ignore. North Star would operate seasonally, with stricter access plans, upgraded communication, relocated fuel storage, and a winter support schedule that did not depend on one exhausted manager and one old dog. Truman Beck Sayer stayed on, but he stopped pretending staying meant doing everything alone. Lenora Page Duval took the formal title of health coordinator, though everyone understood she had been doing the work long before anyone gave it a name. Otis Bramwell Keene became maintenance lead for the generator system and, to his deep annoyance, was required to teach 2 other people every repair he knew. "I am being punished for competence," Otis told Rhett the first day back. "You're being backed up," Rhett said. Otis narrowed his eyes. "That's a suspiciously healthy thing to say." Rhett had no answer for that. His own role became part-time and practical. He maintained snow vehicles, trained volunteer drivers on winter supply runs, checked heater systems, and mapped small hazards before they became large ones. He did not wear a title that made him sound important. He did not want one. The work suited him better that way. It was useful without being heroic. On Bastian's first return, the shepherd stepped carefully from the truck, using the ramp Rhett had built. Truman waited on the porch, one hand braced on the rail, his wrapped ankle hidden inside a heavy boot. Neither man spoke at first. Bastian solved that by walking straight to Truman and leaning against his leg. Truman bent slowly and placed a hand on the dog's neck. His face tightened, not from pain in the ankle. "Hello, old friend," he said. Rhett stood beside the truck, watching. He expected jealousy to move through him. It did, but not in the same way. It came as a small ache, then passed. Bastian looked back at him once, as if to make sure he understood. Rhett did. A few days later, the paperwork arrived. The transfer of ownership was handled in a small administrative office at the county building, under fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. There were no cameras, no witnesses beyond a clerk, Truman, Rhett, and Bastian lying between their chairs with his head on his paws. The clerk placed the forms on the table. Truman signed first. His hand paused only once. Rhett watched the pen move and felt the old story try to rise again. The document with Truman's name, the drawer, the years of anger. But this time he read every line. This time he signed his own name. When it was done, Truman rested both hands on the table. "There's one thing," he said. Rhett looked up. Truman's voice stayed level, but the effort showed. "I want him to keep coming back." Rhett looked down at Bastian. The dog's eyes were half closed, as if the entire human matter had taken too long. "Not because you owe me," Truman added, "not because of the house, because it's his place too." Rhett let the words settle. 5 years earlier, he would have heard a demand. Now he heard the truth. Truman nodded once. Rhett said, "That was not forgiveness. It was something sturdier to begin with. After that, the repair between them happened without witnesses. They fixed the west fence in weather too cold for long conversations. Truman measured posts while Rhett drove them into frozen ground. They checked the new fuel enclosure twice, disagreeing over the hinge placement until Otis told them both to stop making a simple door into a monument. They drank coffee in the lodge kitchen without discussing the years they had lost. Some mornings, silence sat between them like a third man at the table. Other mornings, it loosened. Truman told Rhett which residents Bastian had helped most. Rhett told Truman how Bastian used to refuse to sleep unless his working harness was hanging where he could see it. Neither story canceled the other. Both belonged to the same dog. That was the lesson Rhett learned slowly. Love did not become smaller when shared with another life. It became truer. Bastian settled into his new rhythm with more grace than either man. At Rhett's cabin, he slept beside the stove and followed the sun from one window to another. At the workshop, he lay near the open bay door on a padded mat while Rhett repaired snow machines, occasionally lifting his head when an engine changed tone. Once a week, sometimes twice, they drove to North Star Ridge House. There, Bastian moved through the lodge at his own pace. He sat beside people who were not ready for conversation. He rested outside closed doors. He let Otis grumble into his fur while pretending not to need comfort. He accepted Lenora's careful checks with the weary dignity of an old professional enduring necessary supervision. He did not heal anyone by magic. He did not erase what they carried. He simply remained near enough that no one had to sit alone with the worst part of the day. By late autumn, the first snow returned to the high country. It came lightly at first, dusting the pines and whitening the shoulders of the road. Copperglass prepared in its usual practical way. Salt bins filled, chains checked, generators tested, fuel tanks moved to safer ground. Jess's updated maps hung in the county rescue office. Laurel inspected every vehicle with the satisfaction of someone looking for problems before they earned drama. Rhett joined the first winter supply run of the season, not as the man in charge, as one of several people whose names were on the schedule. He loaded medication crates, heater parts, and sealed envelopes of maintenance notes into the truck. Bastian waited on the passenger side until Rhett unfolded the ramp. The shepherd climbed slowly, then settled into the padded space behind the seats. The road to North Star was bright under new snow. At the overlook below the final rise, Rhett stopped. He did not know why at first. Habit, maybe, or the need to stand between two versions of a life and see both without flinching. He opened the rear door and helped Bastian down. The air was cold but gentle. Snow fell in small, slow flakes, bright against the dark pines. Ahead, North Star Ridge House glowed with warm yellow light in its windows. Behind them, the road bent down toward Copperglass, toward Rhett's cabin, the workshop, the stove, the quiet rooms that no longer felt empty. Bastian stood in the snow between both directions. For a moment, the old dog looked toward the lodge, then back toward the truck. Then he stepped close to Rhett's leg and leaned there, not heavily, just enough to be felt. Rhett crouched and adjusted the new collar. The leather was dark brown, soft but strong. The metal tag caught a small flash of winter light. Bastian Rhett Lawson, Kendry North Star Ridge House, 2 numbers beneath. 2 doors, 2 places that would answer. Rhett ran his thumb once over the edge of the tag. Bastian no longer belonged to a unit, a mission, or an old wound someone had refused to touch. He did not belong to a mistake. He did not belong to a promise broken beyond repair. He belonged to the life that had kept going. Rhett looked at the lodge lights, then at the road home. For so long he had believed Bastian returned to force him back into the past. Now he understood. Bastian had returned to show him who was still here. Truman at the ridge, Lenora with her watch and charts, Otis with his screwdriver and complaints, Jessa with her maps, Laurel with her fox patch and hard-earned roots, the residents who did not need saving from themselves, only the assurance that someone would notice when the weather turned against them, and Rhett himself, still here, still able to keep a promise, even late. He rose slowly, his knee stiff in the cold. Bastian waited until Rhett took the first step, then walked beside him up the snow-covered road. They were not going to save the world. They were carrying medicine, checking heaters, listening to radios, and making sure no one on the mountain disappeared into silence. For Rhett, that was finally enough. And for Bastian, walking between 2 open doors, it had always been enough. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. Sometimes it comes back on tired paws, through a snowy road, carrying a reminder that love is not lost just because we were late to understand it. Rhett thought Bastian had returned to reopen an old wound, but in the end, Bastian came back to show him that grace can still find us in the places we avoided, and that a promise can still be honored even after years of silence. So if there is someone you need to forgive, someone you need to call, or some small duty you have been putting off, maybe today is the day to begin again. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who or what helped you keep going when life felt heavy. And if you want more stories of loyalty, healing, and hope, please subscribe. May God give you peace for what you cannot change, courage for what you can still repair, and a quiet reminder that you are not walking alone.